Alright, in this video, we're going to go ahead and hook up our authentication service to our site so that we can actually start to see it in action or see our concept of a user with a particular role in action. The goal here is to be able to mark particular controllers or particular actions as requiring a specific role in order to access, and then if that role isn't met, force them to go into our login page, which will let them log in and then redirect them back to the page they were trying to access. In addition, in this video, we'll also have to go ahead and work on our layout for our front end so that we can have our register, login, and logout links set up properly. So how do we go about making it so we can require authentication? One of the ways is we can add the authorized attribute to our controllers or to our actions. So I could just say authorize, and that would require that the person be authenticated in order to access this resource. So let's go ahead and test that out. I'm going to hit F6 to build. Then I'm going to hit Control F5 to launch our page in a browser and fire up our web server. And of course, remove all that stuff. Oh, actually, it's working right now. As you'll see, we tried to hit the root of the page, but it's redirecting us to which the root of the page is this action. But you'll see it's redirecting us to /login return URL equals blah. Well, that's because we made a mistake, or well, I made a mistake in the web config and didn't put the proper route to the login page. If you recall, the login page is accessible through auth login, not just login. So I'm going to go into web.config and I'm going to find where I made that mistake, and that's right here on the form's authentication configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and say auth/login to give it the proper URL. Now that I've done that, if I try to access the home page again, what we'll get is a redirection to auth login, which is exactly what we want, mostly. Let's go ahead and type in admin, and I totally forgot what I changed the admin password to. Let me go ahead and reset the admin password to something I can remember, because I think that would be a good idea going forward, that I could actually log into an account and just reset that to test. Okay, going back into the front end, we are required to log in, so I'll pass in a username of admin, a password of test. Wait a second for that hashing magic, and we are now accessing the site. So again, simply by adding the authorize attribute to our home controller, we now require that anybody who accesses any action inside this controller be logged in. So that's really cool. We'll also want to do the same thing in the admin. We want to go ahead and add the specific roles that a person visiting the site will need in order to access a particular resource. And when we mark up our admin controllers with that, we'll definitely want to mark the admin components requiring the admin role. We do that by using the constructor and simply typing in roles equals, and then, well, roles. So we could say admin or registered or anything that we want, and then it'll require that that user has that particular role in order to access the site. However, some people might be asking right now, how does ASP.NET MVC know what roles a user has? I mean, in fact, all our auth does is sets up forms authentication, and all forms authentication really provides is a username. So we can get our username out, but we don't know what roles it has. ASP.NET MVC doesn't know anything about our entities or how they relate to each other or how to retrieve the roles that a user might have out of that database. So what we need to do is we need to create one little component, one little class that's going to implement a particular interface, and that interface is going to be used by ASP.NET MVC in order to establish what roles a user has. So to do that, we need a class. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new namespace called infrastructure. I create the infrastructure namespace just for sort of ancillary concerns that we don't really care about to change very often. And then I'm going to create a class inside of it called role provider. and he's going to inherit from system.web. Whoops, I don't have a colon. System, that didn't come out the way I expected it to, but anyway, system.web.security.roleProvider. Role provider is actually not an interface, I lied. It's an abstract class. So let's go ahead and make C# happy by implementing all of his members. You can do this with either C# or ReSharper or with Visual Studio itself by hitting, I believe it's Control tilde or Control 1. But anyway, so we have a bunch of these methods. The good thing about all these methods is none of them are really needed for our purposes. The only method that we really need to implement to work with the authorize attribute is going to be the get roles for user, this method. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this method up into the top. Then I'm going to replace the implementation of all the other methods with a throw new not implemented exception, which is of course going to bring in a using system at the top. So I'm going to copy and paste this code into each one of these methods. And the reason I'm doing this is to provide a simple sanity check. I said earlier that the only method that we're going to need to implement is the get roles for user, but I want to make sure that that's absolutely correct and at no point in the future we actually end up needing one of these other methods. So instead of having these other methods that we're not implementing remain silent, I want them to throw an error telling us as the programmer that we need to implement another one of these methods. However, in the use case that we are going to be using in this application, the only method that we'll be needing is get roles for user, but maybe if another version, there's a version difference or another component wants another method or something like that, we want to be told about it immediately so that we can fix that problem. So the get roles for user method, I'm just going to write return. Well, there's a variety of ways we could do this. The way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to say, I'm going to write a ternary. I'm going to say auth user does not equal null. If he does not equal null, then I'm going to return auth user roles select, which that's going to bring in using system.link at the top, select name dot to array colon new string empty. Okay, so this basically says if the user is not null, return a list of all the role names that he has on him. If he is null, return an empty string, meaning that there are no roles that the user has, which is what we want. But we're not done yet. So we've made the class, but we haven't told ASP.NET about it yet. So what we're going to do is kind of not surprising. This is very typical with ASP.NET. We have to jump into our web.config, and we're going to go ahead and have to add an element in here that'll indicate what role provider we want to use with our application. So that role provider is going to be added somewhere in our system.web element. So just find your system.web element and add a new line. And the line that we're going to be adding is role manager, or that new element that we're adding. Now the role manager, I'm going to set enabled to be true. Then I'm going to say default provider equals buzz MMO role provider. Now inside of this element, I'm going to add a provider's child. Inside of providers, I'm going to say clear to remove all of the existing default role providers from our application, because we're only going to be needing one. And then I'm going to add the one that we specified up there in default provider. So I'm going to give its name to be buzz MMO role provider. And then I'm going to give its type to equal buzz MMO dot web, and ReSharper's giving me some nice little IntelliSense for this too, which is cool. Infrastructure dot role provider. Now by doing that, we've hooked our role provider up with ASP.NET, so now we can use a variety of different new methods on our identity class, such as hasRole, to determine throughout our application whether or not the current user has a particular role on his account. Okay, so we have our role provider working now, which means I can now do something like on my home controller, I can say authorize roles equals, let's say, registered. Now I know we don't have a registered role yet, and we're going to be building that here momentarily. But just to briefly talk about why I want a registered role is when a user gets created, I want them to have to validate their email address. So I want the website to send them an email that'll require them to click on a link to make sure that they typed in their email address properly, because the email address is going to be used for other features, such as getting a hold of the user in the first place, but also for resetting their password and other things. So what I want to do is I don't want to consider a user to be registered and able to see everything until they've verified their email address. So when they verify their email address, I'll add the registered role to them. But before that, they won't have the registered role, so they won't have access to certain things on the site. So I'll go ahead and hit F6, and now the registered role doesn't exist. So basically what's going to happen is it's impossible for me to get the home page now. It looks like we have a problem. The problem, funny enough, has to do with lazy loading. Again, don't you love that? I mean, lazy loading is great when it works, but it also will cause problems and headaches. The issue is that we are trying to grab the roles out of the user object, but the session that we created for our user object has already been disposed. If you recall, in our auth service on our user property, we establish a connection to the database and we grab the user, but we don't grab his roles. And because we don't grab his roles, when we try to access his roles later down the line, it's going to try to query the database again, but it's not going to be able to because the connection will be closed, because the connection gets closed immediately when this using statement is done with, or this using block. So how do we fix it? Well, we simply eagerly load his roles. So I'm going to keep the first line right there, but I'm going to be replacing it with this second line of code, which is going to be user equals database.users single or default. T goes into ID equals user ID. And then, of course, I forgot that we have to do include before we do the single or default. And I'll say include f goes into f.roles. And of course, this isn't going to work yet because I need to actually import the using statement. So I'm going to go up here to the top, and I'm going to say using system.data.entity, which gives us the proper include extension method that allows us to specify the navigation property in strongly typed terms. So this will pull in the user with all of his roles in one query and not result in any sort of lazy loading. So let's go ahead and delete that first line and then recompile with F6. Come back here and hit F5 or the refresh button or whatever works. Wait a year and a half. And we get back to the auth login. And even if I log in to a valid account, we still get kicked back. So we'll continuously get kicked back because our user doesn't have the registered role attached to him. So how do we fix this? Well, I consider the registered role to be very important for our entire system, and I want to enforce that the register role is always available. So instead of adding it to the database manually, I'm going to come back into my buzzmmo.data project, open that up, and then go into my migrations configuration class, and then locate my seed method. So my seed method, again, will be called after every migration, and I'll use it to ensure that there is a role called register in the database no matter what. So say var registered role equals new role, name equals registered, context, roles, add or update, selecting on name, registered role. The next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the admin has the registered role also added to his roles property. So I do that simply by adding a comma and then registered role. So he's both an admin and he's registered. Okay, so now we could technically go in the database and add this registered role manually, but fortunately there's a behavior of the update database package manager console invocation that will invoke the seed method for us. Basically what I'm saying is you can update, that was a convoluted statement, I'm sorry. You can invoke update database, and even if you don't have any other migrations, see it says no pending explicit migrations, it'll still run your seed method. And because it ran our seed method, we can actually verify this. We can open up our database, which ran off onto one of my monitors somewhere. There it is. And we can look in the roles table and see indeed that the registered role did appear. Now the last thing I want to do is we actually have to add the registered role to our admin user manually, because again, our seed method does not update the user or does not add the admin or does not update the admin user if he already exists. So if we come back here and type in admin, we'll be able to locate our admin user and give him the registered role. So under users, under admin edit, we want to add the registered role and say update user. Now, if I hit enter, we have access to the home page. Again, the only reason we have access to the home page is that we are an admin or we have the registered role. And that's because we have the authorized roles equals registered on the home controller. Okay, so now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and close out everything. I'm going to scope back into my buzzmmo.web project because we won't need our data project anymore. Scope to this. Now I'm going to go into the admin home and the admin users controllers, and I'm going to add an authorize roles equals admin on home for the admin home, not the front end home, and on users I'll add authorize roles equals admin. So this means if we log in with a user who isn't an admin, they won't have access. Let's go ahead and test that. I'm going to jump into the admin, which should work because I'm logged in as admin who is an admin. Admin. Say that bunch. Jump into users. I'm going to go ahead and make sure NLAC is registered but not an admin, so we can test the behavior of the system when we sign in with somebody who is not an admin. I also want to reset his password. I'll reset his password to test. Now if I go back to the front end, you'll see we can still hit the home page because we're still logged in as admin. So let's change that. Let's go to auth login manually, and let's type in nlac and test and log in as nlac. So we can still see the home page as nlac, but now let's try to go to the admin. We get access to this admin homepage. Oh no, we didn't. It was something was cached. That was really weird. Actually, let me go ahead and so we logged in as admin, we went to the admin, we did some stuff in the admin, we went out, oops, I went full screen. We went out of the admin, we went to auth login, we typed in nlac and test, then we went to the admin, and okay, yeah, it's working now. Something was cached for a second. But you see, when I tried to access the admin as nlac, we get pushed back to the auth login page. In addition, we can also see an example of the return URL being used in action. Because when I type in admin test, we'll get sent right into the admin page. So that's really cool. We now have our front end and our back end secured in such a way that only registered users can see the home page and only admins can get into the admin. So yeah, that's all cool stuff. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make our admin layout, or not our admin layout, our front end layout a little nicer and allow us to navigate between the logging in and logging out and all that fun stuff. Speaking of logging out, we should probably also implement that functionality too. So if we go into our auth controller, we notice we have a login method, but we don't have a logout method yet. So let's go ahead and write that real fast. In the auth controller, I'm going to write HTTP post public AR log out, and then I'm simply going to say auth.logout, whoops, not login, logout, and then return redirect to action, I don't know, redirect to action login, I guess, because that's probably the only action that I have that isn't secured by something. In addition, I also am going to make the logout method have an authorize attribute that requires the roles of registered. Okay, and then make sure that login both do not require that you're logged in, because if the login form requires that you're logged in, then nobody can log in. All right, so then let's go ahead and put together our front-end layout, which will have a nice little logout button on our thing. So let's jump into shared layout. I'm going to be pretty much taking some code out of our admin layout. So I'll jump into the admin's layout and I'll see how we did things here. In fact, I'm just going to copy and paste this, including the scripts.render, because I'm going to be creating a new bundle for our front-end layout. Okay, so now we have this. Our action link will have a home index home, but I'm only going to show that. So I'm going to say if user is in role registered. So if the user is registered, then show them the home page. Then I'll say if user is, or user.identity is authenticated, then we'll want to show them the logout button. So the logout button is going to look like this. We're going to have logout, we're going to have an action of logout and a controller of auth. But in addition to that, we're also going to have a class of post. So that means the login button is going to post to the login action, which is what we want. If they're not logged in, I want to show a login button. So I'll do li html action link login auth ith auth. All right, so that's our nice little navigation for our front end. In addition, I'm going to go down here to scripts and I'm going to say JS front end, which doesn't exist yet. We're about to create it. Okay, so now that we have our layout set up for our front end, let's jump into app start bundle config. And let's create a front end scripts bundle. So basically just like our back end scripts, we're going to say front end scripts equals new scripts bundle JS squiggly JS front end. Front end scripts include squiggly scripts jQuery 210.js. By the way, the reason I'm not sharing the front-end bundle with the back-end bundle is that it's very common that the kinds of dependencies and code that we'll have on the front end will differ from that in the back end. So even though right now they're basically the same bundles, including the same scripts, in the future we might want to modify that. So it's a good idea that your different areas each have their different sets of bundles. All right, let's go ahead and add our transform. So I want a JS minify transform. And then let's finally say bundles add front-end scripts. Hit F6, and then come back to our page, refresh. Wait a year. There we go. We now have a home page and a logout. That logout, typically logout things are on the, or login things are on the right-hand side of the screen. It's actually very trivial to do. Let's go ahead and bring in our, show our front-end layout. And then let's add the pull right class to both of these LIs. And let's pray that they didn't change this between Bootstrap 2 and Bootstrap 3, because I've never used pull right on Bootstrap 3 before. Refresh, and it doesn't work. So let's go ahead and take a quick trip into the docs. Docs are always fun. All right, so we definitely want to look at our, if we go into components, we'll definitely want to look at our navbar, and then we'll want to find something that's pulled to the right. And how do they do that? they say navbar right. So they create two separate navbars. That's weird. They completely remove the pull right? No, they have the pull right there. Huh. Maybe they want us to add it to the buttons themselves, which is very, very, very unlikely. Yeah, that doesn't work. All right, so it looks like Bootstrap really, really, really wants us to create another UL, and you know what? That's all right. We'll go ahead and create a UL, give it a class of nav, navbar, nav, and navbar, nav right. Hey, wait a second, is it navbar, nav right, or is it navbar right? As much as I love new things, sometimes new things irritate me, and this is one of the instances. It's just navbar right. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and pull in this entire if block, and I'm going to paste it down here into this UL. So coming back to our site, we now have a logout link on the right-hand side. If we hit logout, we will see that we have failed to specify a controller for our logout action. The problem is that we actually did supply a controller, but we ran into one of the most common issues of, one of the most common issues that I run into in ASP.NET MVC quite a few times, and I'll go ahead and explain it real fast in as much detail as I can, so people don't forget this. The way the action link method is organized as far as its overloads go is this overload that I'm using is actually not the one that ReSharper is highlighting. ReSharper should actually be highlighting. Oh no, it is. It's that we hit the route values as an object instead of the controller name. So the overload we're using is thinking that this auth right here is a route value, which is weird. It also explains why we got a query string of length equals 4 at the top. Typically, whenever you see query string length equals blah at the top, that means that you are using the wrong overload of action link. In order to use the correct overload of action link, what we have to do is add in a empty object. So now the overload we're using will have the link text, the action name, the controller name, the route values, which we're setting to empty, and then finally, all the way at the end, the HTML attributes. So coming back here, we can hit log out, and we get logged out. So finally, if we go ahead and just go to the site, we will initially go straight up into the login page. So this might be somewhere where you might want to explain your product. We're also going to have a link for registration here so a user can register. But for now, all it does is it sends us to the login page where we can log in. So again, if I typed in nlac and logged in, we'll come back to our page. We'll have our home link and we'll have our logout link. And of course, if I tried to access the admin as nlac, I won't be able to. So instead, I have to type in admin and test. All right, so that's pretty much all I wanted to do in this video. We have the basics of our website starting to come together. We're not going to be doing a whole lot on the front end just yet. The next couple things that we're going to be doing is we need to create the data models for our well, first of all, we need to allow the users to register. I completely forgot about that. We want users to be able to register. We want them to be able to click forgot your password link, that sort of deal. Then after that point, we'll be done with users, and we'll be able to get into the API that the continuous integration server is going to use in order to upload additional clients and additional launchers so that we can finally put this auto-updating system together. Anyway, guys, I think that just about wraps up this video, so I guess we'll see you later.